Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Joe Heim. I'm a reporter at the Washington Post, and I'm very excited to be here today and want to thank the Library of Congress also for making this day available. It's great to see so many young people here. I learned about Fabien Cousteau that he began scuba diving when he was 4 years old. So all of you young kids who are here today should go home and tell your parents that you want to take this up, and I'm sure they'll make that happen. One of the, if you're my age, you grew up watching Fabien's grandfather, Jacques Cousteau, and he really introduced so many of us to life under the surface of the water in this amazing world that we hadn't even thought possible. He just revealed this in his films, and it's great to see that Fabien has continued this work throughout his life. And he, you may know, a few years ago, lived for 31 days underneath the water in a tank, and stayed all that time and did a lot of research, years and years worth of research condensed in a short amount of time. Also ask your parents if you can do that. And then he's now written this comic book with his friends, The Great White Shark Adventure, and that is available. He'll be signing that book at 3:30 in line 5. And so it is my great pleasure to introduce Fabien Cousteau.
Small disclaimer, we might get in trouble if we get people to start scuba diving at 4 years old. So ask your parents first. Well, hello, everyone. Good afternoon. How's everyone? Good? Yeah? Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you for coming. I want to share some fun stories today, if that's possible. My world is a very different world than what most people are used to. I kind of see the world from the bottom up. I've been called strange. I've been called crazy. I've been told that some of my dreams are impossible. And that just makes me want to do more. So I think that seeing all these wonderful young people and the young people at heart here in the crowd, you'll probably be able to identify the fun, crazy things that we can do if we put our minds to it. When we talk about the ocean world, we talk about a place most people think of as beach, as fun on a boat, maybe even snorkeling around, but most people don't think about the vastness under the water, the immense life support system that it is. And thankfully, in today's world, we share more information than we did when I was a kid. But we still know so very little about our ocean world to date. We've explored less than 5% of our oceans to this day. So it leaves a lot for all of you who may want to go explore the ocean world in the future. One of my inspirations, and as was noted in the introduction, an inspiration to people in the past was my grandfather. My grandfather was a curious person. He was what we call an ocean explorer, which essentially is just someone who's curious and who wants to go and discover more things. But in order for him to have done that in his generation, he had to invent all sorts of tools to get there. Because we are so blessed in this day to have things like scuba and GoPros and submarines and all that sort of thing. But back in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and so on, when he created over 134 documentaries which inspired hundreds of millions of people around the world, he had to invent the tools to be able to go and do those things. Believe it or not, he and a friend of his, Émile Gagnon, created or built the regulator, which is scuba diving, which is the thing you put in your mouth to go and fly underwater, to be free of the bonds of gravity, to explore that strange and mysterious and magical world. And he was not only an inspiration to people around the world, he was an inspiration to us as kids. Because when we were growing up, he and my grandmother would come back and they would give us these tales of their adventures to these farthest reaches of the planet that no one had ever been to. And it was amazing to hear all the new strange creatures that they'd found, all the amazing cultures that they had seen, and all these things that inspired us to think outside the box and to be curious about certain things. Now, growing up, of course, as you mentioned, I started scuba diving from my 4th birthday, which I would say to the parents in this audience, you might want to wait until it's legal, which is about 11 or 12 years old. But if you're curious, you can start earlier on with other systems like SASE and such to really get a feel for what it is. And it's just an amazing ability to go and explore that 95% of the world's living space within which so little has been explored. It's things like sea turtles or the caiman at the bottom of the Amazon River. This is a picture of us on expedition with my father and my sister and I going and exploring a place that my grandfather went to 25 years prior to go and see what's changed. Of course, this slide was put on my deck before we had the recent unfortunate news of all the yearly fires that have gotten so bad this year, but I can tell you that it's not always bad news. There is hope out there, and there are people, more and more of them, doing wonderful things out there to help save and preserve our planet in general. And as we learn more, as storytellers go out there and inspire people around the world, we become more connected with our life support system, this little planet, and we start seeing people doing things about some of the bad things that are happening. Of course, one of my favorite experiences was being able to swim, or free dive, as they say, with some of these amazing creatures, humpback whales. How many of you have had the opportunity to go and see humpback whales from a boat or out there in the water? Has any of you young people? No? Yes. The young man over there, that's fantastic. Oh, and this young lady as well up front. I'm very jealous about your beanbag, by the way. I wish I could be there. That looks like fun. This reminds me of my first internship out of college. Yes. You too? Awesome. So what do we share with cetaceans, whales and dolphins? Do you know? Yes. What is it? They're mammals. Yes, so you're right. They are mammals. But something that's more intrinsic in our brains, something called the mammalian reflex. And a mammalian reflex is simply a reaction that happens when you submerge your face in water, right? We have receptors in our face and in our bodies. But the ones in our face, when we get submerged underwater, when we put our face underwater, it slows our heart rate and our consumption of oxygen so that we can stay down longer. And that really is a vestige in us that we basically don't have very much anymore. But for whales and dolphins, of course, as you know, they get to stay down for extended periods of time, 20, 30 minutes, sometimes much, much more, depending on the species. But if you start learning to free dive, you can double your breath hold time in less than 2 or 3 days with some very basic exercises. So you're coaxing out some of that mammalian reflex back from the vestiges of our DNA. And of course, who doesn't love to be scared by sharks? When I was growing up, and I was going on expeditions since the age of 7, I would see sharks on almost every dive. And it's amazing to me when we don't see sharks, because it's a real sign of troubles. Sharks, whether you like them or not, are an essential part of the ecosystem in our oceans. There are over 480 species of sharks. Of course, when we say shark, and it happens to be summertime, so everyone has sharks on the brain, but most people will think of great white sharks or bull sharks or maybe hammerheads, but they won't think of the wobblegong or the leopard shark or some of these sharks that are barely the size of your arm, if not smaller, and completely inoffensive. And yet these animals provide the essential job of cleaning our oceans. It's like living in a city and having the garbage cleaners go on strike. Imagine how chaotic life would be very, very quickly in a city. It's the same thing in our oceans if we wipe out all our sharks. So it's always amazing to see sharks. being able to go out there and really connect with nature in a way that is conducive to understanding. When my grandfather was alive, and he would tell us, people protect what they love what they understand, and they understand what they're taught. Now, I'll say this to my own detriment, but I was a terrible student in school. I'll admit that right now. I'm sorry for the educators in the room. But I didn't pay attention very well. I was the quintessential ADD kid looking out the window instead of paying attention to the educator and the information I was supposed to be absorbing. And I was always dreaming about the next adventure. And so to me, it's always been a challenge to keep my attention in a way that that information absorbs in through my thick skull and actually stays inside my brain. But experiential learning and comic books was a way that I would absorb that kind of information, because the key for my stimulation was adventure, was that next satisfaction of curiosity and going out there and living dreams that I have at 3 o'clock in the morning. Sometimes it's about alien spaceships. In this case, it's underwater alien spaceships, and sometimes it's about encountering strange and weird creatures. Now, in the introduction, you had mentioned an expedition that I led a few years ago called Mission 31. And Mission 31 was based on a premise of some of the things that my grandfather and others have done in the past, which is building underwater houses. That sounds kind of strange, but there is a good reason for that. In the 1960s, people wanted to understand if human beings could even live underwater and work underwater, because of those legends of Atlantis and all sorts of underwater communities. We wanted to understand if that was even possible. And there have been a dozen or so habitats or underwater houses built in history. There was only one left a few years ago called Aquarius. 20,000 millimeters under the sea. For those who don't speak metric, that's about 66 feet. And within that beautiful little crusty old 29-year-old habitat, you could stick 6 aquanauts. Yes, aquanauts. Aquanauts are astronauts underwater. Quite literally, to become an aquanaut, you have to do the same kind of training that you would to go in outer space, because you're going in inner space. You're living in an extreme environment for extended periods of time. And so Aquarius, or this underwater house, underwater laboratory, if you will, was going to be your home in this extreme environment, a little bit like the space station is in space. Now you might think, well, that's no big deal. It's only 60 feet down. You can go scuba diving down there. Some people can even hold their breath to go down there. Well, yes. But one of the biggest frustrations as a scuba diver is the limit of time. Because what you learn as a scuba diver is that you have to come back up after 60 minutes to avoid decompression obligations. Well, let's flip this on its side, or on its head. As an aquanaut, you don't avoid decompression, you maximize decompression. And the benefit to that is that you exchange your access to the surface world for being able to live and work underwater in that aquatic environment for indefinite periods of time. And I always thought that was the neatest idea. And so I led a team of 5 other crazy people who were young people from MIT, Northeastern, FIU, to live and work underwater for 31 days. And 31 days is symbolic because it's 1 day longer than my grandfather did in the 1960s, so that we could broadcast that and show that to the rest of the world, and more important, to highlight the amazing, mysterious undersea world. We were able to do over 3 years worth of scientific experiments as opposed to scuba diving from the surface, because of that lack of limit of time. Imagine that you're going to work, right? You're going to school. You got to get dressed up in the morning, you got to eat your breakfast, you go out the door, and you go out into your workplace or into school. Well, for us, it was the same thing. We would get up in the morning, very early, usually 5 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning. We would get dressed, we would eat breakfast in this wonderful little house, about 650 square feet of internal space for 6 people. Or if you live in New York City, you know that very, very well. It's like living in an apartment in New York City with 5 other roommates. 600 square feet, that's luxurious. And so we'd able to do that, and then we'd put our suits with our hard hats on, and we'd go out and commute into that underwater world and go and mingle with some of the strangest creatures on Earth, like the mantis shrimp or the Goliath grouper. Can you imagine, for example, that if you saw a Goliath grouper and you had a camera that could shoot 20,000 frames a second, you could see a cavitation bubble that forms in front of its mouth when it booms, when it barks, that is hotter than the surface of the sun. And for that split second, that pressure wave that it makes will go down the water column and stun its prey, and it will aspirate its prey. All this within a blink of an eye. And without that camera, you can't see any of it. Well, because we had that access, we were able to see that. And thanks to some really cutting-edge technologies, we were able to broadcast that from the bottom of the sea for people to see. And that was really neat. That, for me, was a first, to be able to have Wi-Fi at the bottom of the sea that was better than the Wi-Fi I have in my own apartment in New York City. And we had cameras live all around the place, so it was kind of strange and weird, like Big Brother was watching you, right? And I was sitting there talking to those 2 guys, talking about the day's activities, and I started coughing, because the air inside is much thicker, it's much more syrupy. We're at 3 atmospheres, right? Down at the bottom of the sea, it's same pressure as outside, and so it's harder to breathe. And so I choked on something, I was coughing, and all of a sudden, my phone rings at the bottom of the sea. And I'm looking down, text messages. It's from my mom. Son, are you okay? Do we need to send a doctor down? And I love my mother dearly, but sometimes cameras can be a little intrusive. And so it was an amazing experience that we dubbed Mission 31. And if you want to see any of that, of course, you can go on YouTube. We put 31 of those videos in those 31 days to see what aquanauts do at the bottom of the sea. One of the saddest moments in my entire career as an aquanaut, as a scuba diver, as an ocean explorer, is having to give up that luxury of time. Because as I said, you have to give up that luxury of access to the world for that luxury of time. Now I had to switch it back and give up that luxury of time at the bottom of the sea to go back to the surface world. Well, in order to do that, we had to decompress for over 24 hours on and off oxygen in that habitat while it was sealed, and we brought the pressure back up so we could go to the surface. It was one of the most magical moments to be able to live underwater like an aquarium. And I hope that in the future, we might be able to build new underwater habitats and new underwater cities to be able to work and live underwater for much longer than those 31 days. Imagine being able to do that. Being able to have submarines coming out of there. Just like you drive your car out of your garage, you're driving the submarine out of the habitat to go into the abyss, into the depths of our planet that we have yet to explore. Now, one of my inspirations was as a kid, as I mentioned, is not only expeditions, but is also cartoons and comic books. I loved fantasy and I loved comic books, especially Tintin and Astérix and all that, and I was a big avid collector of them. Tintin and le Trésor de Rackham le Rouge, or Red Rackham's Treasure, was one of my favorites because, not because he was looking for treasure at the bottom of the sea, but because he had built a shark-shaped submarine. And I thought that was the coolest idea. I mean, come on. You could bring your dog, you could go and visit the undersea creatures in a submarine that looked like a shark. Well, I thought, I wonder if that's actually possible. Well, people told me it was crazy, it was impossible, and I was wasting my time. But I was able to find some young people and some young people at heart who were able to think outside the box and say, you know what, maybe that's not such a bad idea. And so we set off to build a shark-shaped submarine so I could get in it and swim amongst great white sharks as one of them so that we could see what sharks do when we're not around. Would you like to see a video? All right, so here's a short video of Mind of a Demon.
They say one man's courage is another man's madness, and one man's madness is another man's nightmare. This is the nightmare of the deep. The perfect killing machine. The demon. But this story isn't about sharks. This story is about us. They say you can only fear that which you don't understand. If that's true, then for Fabien Cousteau, the only way to unlock the mind of the demon is to become the demon.
To people about this project, I get a lot of blank stares. We're doing what? You say, great white sharks. You go, why?
I watched him climbing in and out of that animal, and I still am watching him do it. And all I can say is it doesn't look very much fun to me. Hey, there's another one for you, Fabien, because it ain't me. I wouldn't do it.
Let's go, let's go.
Are we good?
Okay, let's go, lift it up.
The Shark Submarine was designed to be the perfect camouflage.
Lift it up.
It would allow Fabien Cousteau to swim undetected with some of the most powerful predators on the planet.
Coming down, guys.
But as the shark began to submerge on their first ocean dive with great white sharks, Cousteau began to realize that he was in a very serious situation.
I have no idea. God, can you hear him?
I can't hear it.
Try.
I have a really hard time to understand what they're saying.
What? I can't hear you.
On his first dive, Fabien had lost contact with the surface and lost control of the sub. He was heading for the bottom, and there was nothing he could do to stop it.
Sorry for the teaser. I wonder if that guy made it. So it was a different approach to a topic that most people really enjoy to focus on, but sometimes they're fearful of. How many of you are afraid or are concerned by sharks? Look at that. Look at all those arms. That's pretty amazing. Now, I wanted to address this because the general public is scared of sharks. And yes, we should definitely be cautious of them. They are wild animals in a foreign environment. But I wanted to also be able to show what they were like. And, you know, things don't always go as planned, as you could see in the video. Now, that was just a teaser. We were able to do over 4.5 months of diving with that shark sub every single day on a place called Isla Guadalupe, where there are lots and lots of white sharks, and they're feeding on elephant seals. Now, unfortunately, that sort of scenario happened probably 40 to 50% of the time because it's an experimental submarine and experiments don't always go well. Well, when it finally was working perfectly, I ended up taking the Shark Submarine at night to go swimming amongst great white sharks as one of them. And of course, this thing happened at that time also. Now, why Cousteau, are you crazy? Why would you want to go swimming with sharks at night in a feeding zone with them? Because we don't know what they do. And if we don't push the boundaries and we don't push the realm of the known, we'll never know more about them to be able to better mitigate our interactions with them, be able to be in places with them without causing any harm to them or ourselves. And at the end of the day, The Shark Sub did work. Obviously, I'm still in one piece, so they didn't find me very attractive. And we were able to come back with all sorts of information about sharks in general, but shark behavior in specific, that hopefully shed a little more light to a CBS audience, which is not a PBS, Nat Geo, Discovery Channel audience, but an audience that doesn't normally tune in to those natural history films. And that brings me to something that I wanted to share with you. Because not everyone watches television. Not everyone necessarily wants to be entertained in that sort of way. And so I wanted to be able to bring some of these adventures and infuse it with some fantasy, some of the possibilities of them dreaming about becoming the next explorers, or at least having them be the curiosity, stimulating the curiosity of them thinking about the undersea world. And so with that, Mind of a Demon became an illustrated book that is called The Great White Shark Adventure. And the fictional aspect of things is we're bringing young people with us on these expeditions. And so when you read through this book, you'll be able to see that not only are we bringing young people with us and a group of young, intrepid adventurers to learn more about this adventure, but there are some real facts in there, facts about sharks, and of course, facts about our expeditions as well, as you can see with the White Shark Submarine. So I hope you all will enjoy this illustrated book. I thank you for your time, and most importantly, remember what my grandfather used to tell me. People protect what they love what they understand, and they understand what they're taught. You all are the future of our planet, and we're counting on you to make sure that we give back to you what we've taken for granted, and I hope some of you will become ocean explorers and, more importantly, scuba divers down the road to enjoy this strange alien world. Thank you very much. I'll see you soon, maybe at row 5.